Welcome to my breakdown of episode 6 of season 3 of The White Lotus. This week's title was Denials, which is a perfect way to describe what we see in this week's story. With the definition of denial being the action of declaring something to be untrue, we see a lot of our characters were in denial to a T. As we see the aftermath of the full moon celebration affecting their brothers in a very major way, meanwhile we see their father Timothy has some very dark thoughts. We also see everyone else just trying to figure out who they are or who they want to be. We have a lot to discuss in this very dark and incest heavy episode, so let's break it all down, spoilers ahead. Now it's almost the next morning after last week's celebration, but one person who isn't celebrating is Timothy, who's imagining what would have happened if he took his own life and leaving his family to finding him laying in his own blood and horror. I'm not gonna lie, for a second there, I actually thought that he did it, like they almost got me in this opening, but we see Timothy takes the gun and hides it in the drawer in the living room and takes another pill before heading off to bed. Now in bed, Victoria still is under the belief that Timothy is under all this stress because of Piper's recent news, as she tells him that Piper will eventually find her happiness just like them and she'll be normal again.
I'm not worried in the slightest.
Now as we catch up to the rest of the characters, we see Guy Talk on his bike to work where his manager or supervisor wants him to take the gun out after their shift for shooting practice. Now we also see Valentine and Jaclyn saying their goodbyes after their sleepover as Kate, who's on the phone, takes notice of him leaving and whoever she's talking to most definitely getting all the tea of what she just witnessed, most likely her husband. Which, if it is her husband or not, I wonder if she did tell them what she saw, and will that person start a rumor online about Jaclyn, which could potentially ruin her marriage. Now back on the boat, we find the brothers share a bed, and we get the reverse of episode 2, where this time around, a very confused Saxon wakes up to the sight of his little brother's ass this time around. Now at the start, we don't really know if we can really trust the flashback where we see Saxon remembering what happened before falling asleep, but later on it's confirmed by Chloe. Now in him trying to remember what happened the night before, we see him trying to convince Chelsea to sleep with him, but she doesn't. Now as we see him making out with Chloe, we see that she's more interested in Locke as they actually hook up, but that's not all. We see Locke also make sure that he's taking care of his brother at the same time. Yes, that's right. We see while Locke was smashing Chloe, he's also pleasuring his older brother. Look, from the start, I had this feeling. I know some of you all didn't share the same sentiments, but I think it's kind of clear as day now that Locke was indeed checking out his brother in episode 1. He was the one that enjoyed their kiss that they shared in last week's episode, and he doesn't seem to be a victim of his brother like some of you all initially thought after episode 1. Now, another thing I saw that many of you all pointed out in the comments last week was that it appeared that Lachlan didn't actually take the drug and he was pretending to be high, but in reality, while he may have been drunk, he seemed to have had plans of taking advantage of his brother under the influence. Look, let's talk about it. HBO is no stranger to having incest relationships in some of their bigger shows, but no matter the context or the genre, I'm team no incest. I wouldn't say this is taking me out of the story. It's just not a lifestyle choice of incest that I necessarily support, but put that aside, last week's episode and this week's episode really reshapes Lachlan as this character that I kind of had empathy for at the beginning of the season, but now I'm questioning whether if he didn't take the drug or not, but he knew his brother took it, and again, I think he took advantage of him. I am really unsure where this particular plot is going, but let me know throughout the episode, how did you all feel about Lachlan? Now, the Ratliff boys and Chloe and Jaclyn weren't the only ones who got laid in last week's episode, as we cut to Belinda and Pungchai waking up under her, and I would imagine they had a good time. As we see her smiling, but she hears the front gate open and she sees her son Zion is here. This moment of Zion seeing his mom with this man in bed and him not freaking out or causing a scene or doing anything crazy, it told me everything I need to know about this mother and son relationship. So many times in movies and shows, we've seen it where the kids freak out on their parents and their parents have to spend so much time apologizing. And look, walking in on your parents and seeing them post-sex isn't something I think anyone wants to see. But in this scenario, Zion handled it like an adult, as did Belinda. And again, it just let me know that this will be a relationship that I will enjoy. Now back on the boat, we see Chloe on the phone with Gary Gregg, who's throwing a tantrum over the fact that she took his boat without him. Now Chloe can read between the lines. She knows that Gary Gregg knows that she slept with one of the brothers, but she tells Chelsea that she actually hooked up with both of them. Chloe thinks that Gary will dump her as Chelsea tries to cheer her up by letting her know that there's plenty of fish in the sea, but Chloe isn't stupid. She realizes that she has a good situation going on with Gary and she doesn't want to start over from scratch. From here, we briefly see Chelsea finally hearing back from Rick, and of course she's checking up on him. Now, she's still very fearful, and she's still in the mindset that bad luck comes in threes, and she's afraid that it's just a matter of time before that third bad thing is coming, and honestly, by the way things are shaping up, she's not wrong. Now we see Saxon is still in disbelief about the night and tries sobering up, and in doing so his memory is more vivid and we get a more accurate moment of us seeing it being Lachlan's hand under the sheets, and it was not Chloe's based on the first angle of the shot that we started this episode with. Now Locke claims that he can't remember what happened the night before, and Saxon says that they both blacked out. But we actually cut back to that act and we see both of them looking at each other while Locke was pleasuring his older brother. Now after seeing them looking at each other, I know that drinks and drugs were involved on both parties, but I could see how people may say that maybe Saxon subconsciously knew what was happening, and again, the episode's title can point to that. But then on the other side of me, I can 100% be behind him not having a clue of what actually was truly happening during that moment, and maybe he thought that it was Chloe's hand instead. Again, if Locke did spit out that drug last week and he was very much sober, well, not entirely sober because we know he did have quite a few drinks, but he wasn't maybe affected by the drug like the others were, but he seems to be worried about Saxon's reaction, almost like he was hoping for him to act differently, as we see Saxon ignoring him on the boat and almost avoiding him as he runs to the bathroom throwing up just thinking about what happened. Now we cut to our ladies, minus Jaclyn this time, which leaves Kate to telling Laurie about their sleepover. Now we see that Laurie is visibly upset after learning this, and also gives this look like this isn't the first time that Jaclyn has done this, which is actually said later on in this episode.
Do you see how she was pushing him on me? And all the time she wanted him, she has not changed at all.
Now, a question of the week for you all, to all my adults out there. If you were in this situation, whether you want to label it as guy code or woman code, putting Jaclyn's marriage aside for the situation, but was Jaclyn wrong for sleeping with Valentine, or are the rules different when you're on vacation because once they leave, they'll never see him again? Also, Jaclyn gave Laurie the opportunity to sleep with him, even though we don't know if the feeling was mutual. Like, we don't know if Valentine actually is attracted to Laurie. So comment below if you think Jaclyn was right to shoot her shot, taking her being married away out of this equation, or was she wrong for what she did and she broke the woman code? Now, speaking of Jaclyn, her husband finally calls her back as he says he was busy at work on the set all day, as we get a little insight on this relationship that seems to be more from a place of lust more so than love, as he seems to only care about being so horny and missing her, and she plays along. Meanwhile, we see Laurie dogging her out, saying how Jaclyn is now this aging actress and just throws herself around to get the attention of man, and she's just passively going in on her as a person or so-called friend. Now, Kate says that she didn't think that Laurie would care so much, and honestly, I'm kind of torn. Like, on one side of me, I believe her because they are adults and this was a one-night stand, but I also want to call BS because I feel Kate's been the one common denominator within the drama of both sides of the gossiping.
I just thought you were going to laugh about it.
Oh, yeah, I'm laughing. It's funny. Ha! But also,
Yeah.
But to make matters more interesting, and one of my favorite scenes of this week's episode, speaking of the devil, Valentine comes to say good morning to the both of them. Now, this is what I'm here for. In my personal life, I do everything in my power to avoid messy situations, but this is why I watch this show. I really enjoyed this scene. Like, I love this scene because Carrie Coon is really playing it well. Like, you can tell she's salty as hell right now as we see Laurie giving him the cold shoulder and her skipping out on their sessions for the day and not going to watch the fight later in the evening. And then she even throws in a subtle jab about Jaclyn not being with them because she had a late night. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a slow build up that I know a lot of you all complain about, but the tea is finally boiling.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
Now we catch up with mother and son, and again, if I couldn't love them even more, we see Zion is happy that his mom still got her groove back and is still sexually active.
Got a new boyfriend now?
Hey,
Mama gotta have a life too.
Now look, I respect that Belinda is a cool mom and a chill mom, but she still has her boundaries with her son as he talks about his sex life being dry right now as we see Belinda putting him on game.
You might be an adult, but I'm still your mother. I don't want to hear that shit. First you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the woman. Huh?
Now Fabian comes in and says his hellos, and he actually invites them to his singing debut that's going to take place later that evening, but you can tell that Belinda is still bothered by the whole Gary Greg situation, or at least how Fabian handled it, as she can just tell that she's uncomfortable around him, and rightfully so. Now the Ratliff boys return to the villa and learn about Piper's future plans from their mother, even though that we know that Lachlan already knows. Now Locke repays his promise that he made to Piper a couple episodes ago by backing her up in the situation, as he says that he thinks it's a pretty cool opportunity for her to come back to Thailand, but their mother still isn't convinced, as they head out to meet what Victoria hopes better be the best Buddhist in China. Now Locke agrees to go with them in support of Piper to meeting the monk, but again, he doesn't get a response from his older brother when he says goodbye. Yet another example of how this family, and honestly any of these characters, really can't seem to understand that communication is key, but instead they avoid the tough problems by ignoring it and being in denial. Now this was an interesting moment. We get to actually see Gary and Chloe alone in his house, and he knows that she's lying about not sleeping with one of the brothers, but he just doesn't know exactly which one it was. As we see that she continues to lie about it, but he's throwing a get together and he wants her to invite the brothers and needs her help with something. Now, it's never confirmed what he wanted from her in this episode, but I was left thinking that it either had to do with something with the brothers or Belinda. And chances are that she's going to probably agree to help him because she doesn't want to lose her golden ticket to this lifestyle with Gary/Greg. Now, we see Punchai continues to be a stand-up guy and offers his support in Belinda's dreams and helping her open her own shop one day, but he wants to do it together. I have some thoughts. First off, super nice of him to offer that, but I mean, come on, bro. It's been no more than a week that they first met each other in person, and they just slept with each other the day before, and he's already talking about going into business together. Am I tripping in this situation? I guess Belinda really put it on him that good. Let me know in the comments, is this a red flag of him moving way too fast, or is it just a very nice person doing a very nice thing? And secondly, we know what happened last time someone offered to help her in business. They end up being Tanya, and she got distracted and she ended up dead. So did Punchai just set a similar fate for himself, or will the spy she wanted be her happy ending? Now back in Bangkok, we have the meeting with Rick and Shatala as Rick takes notice of her security situation in preparation for her to meet with his director. Now Rick keeps appearances going with his chipper attitude and continues this lie about the movie, and he tells her that the part requires the director and him to come over to her house to observe her being in her habitat, obviously as a way to get into Jim, which we see later on. Now at the monastery, Piper meets with the monk. Now Piper has a brief conversation alone with him before her parents arrive, and we see her getting a little emotional and shares with him how she's felt lately and how she doesn't share any interests or have similar values that her family does. Now if I'm being honest, I'm still not super invested in her personal story this season, but I can still appreciate the sentiment behind her being someone who's grown in her own values as an adult and she doesn't support her family ways of life and their thinking. Now Piper does her best to prep the monk before her parents walk in, especially her mom, but we see that he's super chill and he's super nice about the whole situation, and he tells her that he would love to answer any questions that they may have. Now back outside, Victoria takes it upon herself to walk around while Timothy speaks with the monk. Now this was another standout moment for me as we watched the monk explain to Timothy why someone like Piper or others travel around the world to join the monks.
Many young people come here from your country. I think because maybe spiritual malaise, lost connection with nature, a family, lost connection with the spirit.
When the monk said to Timothy, "You cannot outrun pain," it definitely hit me in the feels because I've done this in the past. I'll be honest with you all. I've tried running away from my problems sometimes, and I definitely related to this scene, and we can see that it definitely hit Timothy with his current situation as well. Now, Timothy has one more important question for him, and it's one of those big ones that I think we all think about sometimes, and it's the question about what happens to you when you die.
You land back into the water, become one with the ocean again.
Now, me personally, I wouldn't say I'm super religious at this point in my life, but I have my own personal beliefs. But I grew up in the church. I was a part of all the different church activities and whatnot. But I really like the monk's response and the viewpoint about being one with the ocean and one consciousness, and death being sort of like a homecoming. But again, it really hits Timothy, and it seemed like it took his mind off of his current situation. Now, again, on another personal note, death is something I've always had a really interesting relationship with, but as I've gotten older, I tend to find myself feeling similar to what the monk just told him, and I see death as more of a reality more than being afraid of it. Now, Timothy returns to his family, and he tells Victoria that he liked the monk, and he seems to be okay with Piper's decision, but again, Victoria still isn't satisfied. Now, she promises that she'll support Piper's decision if Piper does a test run by staying overnight.
And if you still think this is a place where you want to spend a whole year, then do it. La-di-da.
As we see, Locke agrees to stay with her as well. Now, I kind of figured in my last breakdown that Timothy would have this type of religious realization, but for a little bit here, again, he seemed to have this weight lifted off of his shoulders, but again, sometimes I feel like people use things like signs or religious encounters as a way to mask their denial. Meanwhile, Gaitak is outside the Ratliff Villa in hopes to find the gun while they're out of the villa. But before seeing if he's in the clear, we see Mook speaks with him, and she's excited about the opportunity he has with the shooting range. She's also even more excited about their first date that's going to be happening later that night. Now, as we watch him enter the villa and he searches for the gun, and I've said it once and I'll say it again, I'm a day one fan of the new theme song as it is incorporated into the scene briefly as we hear the beat just drops and it just sounds so dope. I don't understand how people don't like this new theme because it's just such a vibe. Now, after looking around, Gaitak finally finds the gun and he manages to escape without getting caught, but not before having to uncomfortably walk past Timothy and Victoria. Now, I thought him finding the gun was a little bit too easy for me, but I do think it's going to come back around. Like, we obviously know they have a bunch of video cameras and all this video footage that's always going around the hotel, so I could see it where it's going to be positioned where Gaitak either is looking like he stole something from them in their villa, or he's going to get blamed for planting something inside their villa, and if something bad happens to one of the family members, he's going to be the first person to point at. Now, going back inside the villa, we see Victoria confronts Timothy about siding with Piper on her decision.
You ready to shave her head and start banging a bongo in Times Square?
Timothy tells her that he wants them to experience life. Just in case they lost everything, they would have the integrity to continue to survive. Obviously, this having a deeper meaning for him because he knows what's happening back home, but him saying if they lost everything isn't something Victoria subscribes to, as she says that she wouldn't be able to live if that happened. Now, she goes on to say that at this point in her life, she does not have the will to live an uncomfortable life and never had that will to live a life without money or privilege. As we see, Timothy is at a loss of words because, again, he knows what's going on back home, and after his talk with the monk that really seemed to kind of lift his spirits, unfortunately, this conversation seemed to bring him back down to reality. Now, back at the pool, Chelsea takes notice of Saxon's vibe being off, but he blames it on his low energy, but he also says that he's still confused about why she didn't hook up with him the night before.
Hooking up with you would be an empty experience.
And how would you know that?
Because I know. Because you're soulless.
Now, Chelsea's saying to him that he's soulless, and you see the look on his face definitely says that her saying that really got to him, especially after what happened between him and his brother the night before. Now, Chloe arrives and she invites them to the get-together that Gary wants to have, as she tells them that Gary seemed to be turned on by the idea of one of the brothers hooking up with her, and here's where the conversation about the threesome comes up.
Are you kidding me? That was my little brother.
Yeah. And you guys made out.
He tells them that the kiss was just a joke and it was actually forced upon them, but then Chloe says this.
I didn't force him to jerk you off.
Saxon says that he was blacked out, but Chloe remembers everything, and Chelsea's reaction to him blaming the drugs and the alcohol and how there's no drug on earth that would never make her want to hook up with her brother was just hilarious to me. Look, I can't lie, yes, Saxon is a pompous, arrogant prick, but putting that aside, he didn't want anything to do with his brother and him hooking up, and if I'm being honest, I kind of feel bad for him in the moment. Look, again, to me, it's weird and gross and just disgusting as far as incest goes, but like I said all the way back in episode 1, that Locke had a thing for his brother. Now, to be clear, I'm not speaking on Locksland's interest in men or women, like who you like, I've always lived that way, but incest to me is just flat out weird. Sorry, not sorry, but again, I am just curious to see how the brothers will handle this moving forward, and I'm not entirely sure on what the payoff's gonna be. I would have much more preferred if Jaclyn was hooking up with any other man or woman or both to find who he is and his sexual preference, but again, the brother angle is just kind of throwing me off. Now, sticking at the pool, we see Laurie telling Kate that she has to talk to Jaclyn about the Valentine situation. Now, Jaclyn is literally sitting right next to them and she can hear them whispering about her as we see Laurie puts the cards on the table and she flat out asks how it was. Now, Jaclyn claims that nothing happened. He did come to her room for a little bit, but again, nothing happened as she claims. Laurie calls her funny and questions if Harrison and her are in an open relationship, which is something I thought about a couple weeks ago, and she goes on about keeping this secret because what happens in Thailand stays in Thailand. You can just see the passive aggressive behavior from Laurie, like she's clearly upset, and even when she orders drinks, even though Kate didn't want one, we see her slap her on the arm and basically tells her to man up. Now we see Laurie is definitely in her feelings. She's definitely on one right now. Like she keeps going on wondering why Jaclyn pushed him on her, but we see why Jaclyn is a great actress as she keeps reflecting and pretending nothing happened, but she eventually pushes it back on Laurie by obviously being mad about something, and this is clearly she has an attitude. Laurie is taking shots at everyone at this point. She even throws Kate under the bus by mentioning she was the one who saw him leaving her room.
It's like nobody ever changes. We're still the same people we were in the 10th grade. It's just funny. It's funny. Not sure what that means, but okay.
This is what you always did.
Never mind. Forget it. It doesn't matter. What?
Now, this conversation is definitely not over, as Laurie has changed her mind and she wants them to go to the fight, and she keeps pushing the matter, and it's clear that Jaclyn is upset about her husband finding out the possibility of what happened. Now, back in Jaclyn's room, we see Kate tries to settle things down, but Jaclyn isn't happy about the situation and she shares her thoughts about Kate on gossiping.
How much gossip I have to deal with. And like my own friends, the few people that I think I can trust are talking shit about me behind my back. It's really depressing.
Cry me a river, Jaclyn. Like, this is exactly what they say, the pot calling the kettle black. You did the same thing in episode 1 and 2. I'm right now playing the world's smallest violin for Jaclyn's emotions. Like, they're all kind of being hypocritical to me right now as they say it's all fun and games until someone gets hurt. Now back with Rick, he tells Frank the story about his dad and he tells Frank how he wants his help. Now Frank tells him, like he told him last week, he's a different man, and we know that by his wonderful monologue last week, as Frank knows Rick plans on killing Jim if things go south and he doesn't want to be a part of that mess. Now Rick tells him that he won't even bring the gun now to prove that he won't kill Jim, but all he wants to do is talk to him and tell him how badly he messed up his life. Now, as we head towards the end of this episode, back in the monastery, we see the monk instructing everyone, including Piper and Locke, to think about what's on their minds. As Locke replays the previous night of hooking up with Chloe and pleasuring his older brother, which to me confirms that he was fully aware of what was happening, but we see the monk tells them to release all of their thoughts. Now, during this, we see Saxon is stressing out about what happened the night before and the fact that now Chloe and Chelsea know, and it is freaking him the hell out. Now, as he walks back to the villa, I don't think it's a coincidence that this was cut between Guy Tak at the shooting range. It was almost positioned like he was shooting towards Saxon in a way and possibly setting up some foreshadowing, or it could be positioned as maybe a metaphor for Saxon's ego being shot at. Now, to follow that up, this conversation that happens between Guy Tak and his supervisor to me was important because it's talking about him having this lack of a killer instinct because of his kindness. Now, Guy Tak claims that he thinks he has what it takes if push comes to shove, that he can kill someone if need be, but I 100% believe, and I know that this will come back into play at some point, and the chances that Guy Tak being involved in episode's 1 shootout to me seems pretty high at this point. Now, speaking of a killer, cut to Belinda having Greg literally popping out of nowhere, which catches her off guard. Now, he invites her to come over to the get-together and even encourages her to bring her son. Now, she makes up an excuse of why she can't go, but Greg tells her that eventually she should stop by because he thinks they should have a talk. Now, Belinda heads back to her room, and you can see that this interaction definitely got under her skin, and we don't see it, but I would imagine she finally told her son what happened between her and Tanya. I say that because thinking about episode 1's opening, maybe Zion was so afraid of his mother being involved in the shootout because maybe she decided to confront Greg. Now, going back to Greg/Gary inviting her to this get-together, I have a little bit of a wild theory. I bet that Gary set up to have some of those poisonous seeds put in some type of a dish or a drink to give to Belinda if she decided to go. Now, as we end this episode the same way we began, but instead of Timothy imagining him taking his own life, we see him daydreaming about taking his wife's life and his after. As Saxon invites his parents to the dinner party, and after seeing that daydream nightmare, I thought about this. Going back to my poison seeds comments a second ago, and knowing that Pam told the whole Ratliff family about how deadly those seeds can be in episode 1, is there a world where after speaking about death to the monk and how peaceful the thought of death can be and that it's like a homecoming, could Timothy take that as a literal metaphor of them not going back home to America, but instead killing his whole family via those poisonous seeds to avoid facing the suffering back home? Is that too far? Is that too dark for the show? I mean, we literally saw 2 unaliving moments in 1 episode alone, so I don't think it's too far-fetched. As we end with Rick and Frank arriving to the Hollinger's house, now I had to suspend my disbelief in the fact that their security team didn't even bother to check them before entering their home. As we see, Steve introduces himself as we finally get to meet Jim. As the camera slowly comes in on Rick's face as we hear Jim speaking in the background, who, by the way, will be played by the incredible Scott Glenn, as the look on his face looks like the 3rd bad luck Chelsea was in fear of is coming true. Look, I might not get to every comment left on my breakdowns, but I've seen a lot of people here and online in general talking about the season's slow burn approach. Now, I would imagine this show's popularity has grown over the years, and I would imagine a bunch of newcomers have started watching the show, and I bet that they probably binged the first 2 seasons before season 3 began, so the experience of the week-to-week rollout is probably different for a lot of people. But to bring it back home and to bring it to the show and my thoughts, to me, the pacing of this season is almost the exact same as the previous 2. Now, of course, there are different characters this time around, different actors, different story. I'm not saying you all have to love this season, but I feel like each season has shown that it's a slow build and then we get the insane payoff. And I say all that to say that I thought that last week's episode and this week's episode really displayed an incredible amount of patience to building to the inevitable chaos that's to come. To me, the ladies are just moments away from blowing up on each other, and I really enjoyed the hypocritical conversation being had and the denial of Jaclyn's part and the whole confrontation going on with Valentine. The same thing could be said about what's going on with Saxon and Rick and Timothy and all these men denying their situations or handling it in a way that's very unproductive. Chelsea's in denial with her relationship. Victoria's in denial for her daughter's happiness. Lachlan's in denial about his identity. Again, I thought the theme and the title of this episode was handled in such a compelling and introspective way. Now the question is, what will happen next? Will the thoughts of death from Timothy overwhelm him into following through with harming himself or his own family? Will the brothers talk about what happened between them? Will Gaitak be a killer? Will Rick learn what many of you believe will be finding out that Jim is his actual father? Look, I know one thing. Shout out to Belinda and Zion. I love their relationship. I love their dynamic so far. And all I know is they better 100% be okay and safe by the end of this season. There you all have it. That's my breakdown and review of the 6th episode of season 3 of The White Lotus. If you all are still here at this point in the video, I appreciate you all. Do me a favor, put in the comments right now, #SmashBros. Now to my favorite part of covering this show is reading you all's comments about the latest episode. So let me know, what did you all think about what's going to go down between Belinda and Greg? Will the ladies have a heated fight sooner rather than later? Will Rick take all the signs he's been given recently and actually hurt Jim, or is he going to be forgiving? And of course, 6 episodes in, at this point of the season, who is your top candidate for being the one that's going to die by the end of this season? Now, if you all enjoy my breakdown, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the share button, leave your thoughts in the comments below. And also, as I'm recording this, I'm just a day in, but I just started my own official podcast on Spotify and also on Apple Podcasts. So check out the audio version of this very breakdown. Now, if this is your first time listening or watching one of my breakdowns, I appreciate you all. Hope you had a good time. Consider sticking around by watching or listening to my other content by subscribing to the channel or subscribing to my podcast. Now, if you all want to take the support even further, you can join the channel memberships on my YouTube channel, which can be found in the description of this very video. Don't forget, you all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.